It was supposed to be just another lazy afternoon on the farm. The sun was setting, the fields were quiet, until 12-year-old Lucas kicked his soccer ball a little too hard. It rolled across the dirt, bounced once, then vanished behind the doors of the one place his father told him never to go, the old barn. Everyone in town whispered about it, but no one dared to look inside. But Lucas did. And what he found inside didn't just change his life, changed everything they thought. They knew about the family's past. While playing soccer, a young farm boy accidentally kicked his ball into his dad's barn, a place he was strictly forbidden to enter, but when he slipped inside to retrieve it, what he discovered hidden among the hay bales made his heart race. 10-year-old Ethan Matthews wiped sweat from his forehead as he practiced in the yard of his family's isolated Nebraska farm. The summer sun beat down, mercilessly turning the vast cornfields surrounding their property into a shimmering golden ocean. Despite heat, Ethan continued his relentless practice kicking the ball against the weathered siding of their two-story farmhouse with determined precision. 13. He counted under his breath, tracking each successful kick. The rhythmic thud of the ball against the house had become the soundtrack to his summer afternoons. His mother, Sarah, called from the kitchen window, her voice carrying across. They aired Ethan. "I'm making some fresh lemonade. You should take a break soon, before you get heat stroke." Ethan nodded without stopping his practice, his eyes never leaving the ball. "Just a few more minutes, Mom," he called back, determined to reach 50 consecutive kicks. Before stopping, soccer was his escape, the one thing that made him feel like a normal kid despite living miles from the nearest neighbor. As he approached kick number 48, Ethan drew his leg back with extra force, hoping to finish his self-imposed challenge. With a powerful strike, the moment his foot connected with the ball, knew he'd miscalculated. The ball sailed high into the air, far beyond his intended target. Arcing toward the older barn that stood at the edge of their property, time seemed to slow as Ethan watched it helplessly, his heart climbing into his throat. The ball crashed through one of the dusty windows of the barn, the sound off breaking glass cutting through the quiet afternoon air like a gunshot. Shards of glass glinted in the sunlight as they fell to the ground. Ethan froze, his heart racing as he stared at the forbidden barn. His father, Frank, had made it abundantly clear that no one was allowed near that structure, especially since losing the farm's main cattle contract. Last year, the barn had been off-limits for months, with Frank claiming he was using it for storage and equipment. Could be dangerous. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Ethan muttered to himself, panic rising in his chest. His father would be furious about the broken window, but leaving the ball behind wasn't an option either. It wasted only decent sports equipment. He had a birthday gift from his uncle. Before he moved away, his father refused to spend money on what he called frivolous things, now that they were struggling to keep the farm afloat. Ethan scanned the driveway, relief washing over him when he confirmed his father's mud-splattered pickup truck was still gone. Frank had mentioned something about checking the irrigation system in the north field this morning, which meant he might not be back for another hour. With cautious steps, Ethan approached the barn, each footfall filling him with the massive structure loomed over him, its red paint peeling to reveal weathered wood underneath. As he got closer, he noticed something odd. The large padlock on the door, apparently not locked, hanging open on the latch. His father must have forgotten to secure it properly during his morning check. Ethan hesitated, his hand hovering near the heavy wooden door. Every instinct told him to turn around to tell his mother about the broken window and accept whatever punishment would come, but something else. A curiosity, heckled and explained, pushed him forward with a deep breath. Ethan pushed against the heavy door, wincing at the loud creak that broke the silence of the summer afternoon. The door swung open, revealing the shadowy interior of the forbidden barn. Inside the barn, sunlight streamed through cracks in the walls, and the newly broken window illuminating dancing dust particles that swirled in the beam's soft light. The air smelled of hay, old wood, and something else Ethan couldn't quite identify. Something musty and unpleasant. The interior was cooler than outside, a welcome relief from the summer heat. Ethan's eyes adjusted to thedimness as he scanned the barn's interior. Farm equipment sat covered in tarps along one wall, and stacks of hay lined another. He spotted his soccer ball near a pile of hay in the center of the barn and moved toward it, relief flooding through him. If he could just grab the ball and leave quickly, maybe his father would never know he'd been inside. Ethan's eyes adjusted to the dimness as he scanned the barn's interior. Farm equipment sat covered in tarps along one wall, and stacks of hay bales lined another. He moved further inside, relief flooding through him at the thought that he could grab his missing soccer ball and leave quickly. His father discovered he'd been inside the off-limits barn as he approached the center of the barn. Ethan noticed something unexpected, a small makeshift bed constructed of hay bales with some kind of mattress or bedding on top, partially hidden behind stacked feed bags. More shocking was the realization that someone was lying on it. A young girl in a pink dress was sleeping peacefully on the improvised bed, and his soccer ball sat on the straw-covered floor. Near her feet, Ethan took a hesitant step, Clara curiosity overriding his fear. As he approached, he saw it was a girl, maybe 6 years old, sleeping on the thin mattress. Her blonde hair was tangled and dirty, her clothes worn and too small for her frame. A pink dress that might once have been bright now faded and stained. A plastic bucket sat next to the bed, along with a half-empty water bottle and what looked like the remains of a sandwich. The floorboard beneath Ethan's foot creaked loudly in the silence. The girl stirred at the sound of his footsteps, her eyes flying open in terror. They stared at each other for a moment, neither moving or speaking, as Ethan tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The girl's eyes were wide with fear, her small body tensing as if preparing to flee or defend herself. "Hi," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm Ethan. I live in the house. Who are you?" The girl didn't respond, just pulled her knees to her chest and pressed herself against the wall behind the mattress. Her eyes darted toward the barn door, then back to Ethan, as if calculating her chances of escape. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan said, taking a small step back to give her space. "Why are you in our barn? Are you lost?" The girl's lips parted slightly, but before she could speak, the distant rumble of his father's tractor broke the silence. The sound was unmistakable. Frank was returning from the fields earlier than expected. Panic surged through Ethan's body, his heart hammering against his ribs. The girl's eyes widened further at the sound, and she shrank back against the wall, pulling a thin blanket over herself as if trying to disappear. Her reaction told Ethan everything he needed to know. She was terrified of his father. Without thinking, Ethan abandoned his soccer ball, turning and running toward the barn door. He pulled it closed behind him, but in his hurry forgot to replace the padlock on the latch. He sprinted several yards away from the barn, before forcing himself to slow to a casual walk, trying to appear normal despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Frank's tractor appeared over the rise in the driveway, dust billowing behind it. As Ito approached the farmyard, Ethan considered making a dash for the house, but knew that would only draw more attention. Instead, he stood his ground, trying to control his breathing and the trembling in his hands. Frank spotted Ethan near the barn as he parked the tractor, his weathered face immediately contorted with rage as he jumped down from Thesset and stormed toward his son, his eyes flicking between Ethan and the broken window, now clearly visible in the afternoon light. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Frank demanded, his voice low and dangerous as he closed the distance between them. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and calloused hands, face perpetually sunburned from working outdoors. "You know damn well you're not supposed to be anywhere near this barn." Ethan swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "I'm sorry, Dad. Midball went through the window accidentally," he explained, forcing himself to meet his father's gaze. "But I didn't go inside to get it. I was just looking at the damage." Frank's eyes narrowed with suspicion as he glanced at the barn door, noticing the missing padlock. His jaw tightened as he turned back to Ethan. "I'll retrieve your ball," he said after a long, tense moment, "and you'll work off the cost of that window with extra chores." He leaned down, bringing his face close to Ethan's. "Let me make myself perfect likelier. You are never to go near this barn again. It's dangerous and there with all the equipment and chemicals. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, fighting the urge to step back. "Good, Frank," side straightening up. "Now go help your mother in the house. I've got work to do." As Ethan walked away, he could feel his father's eyes boring into his back. Questions swirled in his mind about the frightened girl hiding in the barn, but he knew better than to ask them now. Ethan hurried away from his father's burning stare, his shoulders tense as he made his way toward the house. He retreated to his bedroom, sitting on the edge of his bed as he stared out the window toward the barn. The image of the frightened girl, impossible to shake from his mind. Time passed in a fog of worry and confusion, until his mother's voice cut through his thoughts, calling from the porch for both him and his father to come inside for dinner. Ethan hurries away from his father's burning stare, his shoulders tense as he makes his way toward the house. He retreats to his bedroom, sitting on the edge of his bed as he stares out the window toward the barn. The image of the frightened girl, impossible to shake from his mind. Time passes in a fog of worry and confusion until his mother's voice cuts through his thoughts, calling from the porch for both him and his father to come inside for dinner. Sarah called them in for dinner from the porch, her voice carrying across the yard. "Frank, Ethan, wash up, dinner's ready." Ethan hurried inside, passing his mother with a quick smile that didn't reach his eyes in the bathroom. He scrubbed his hands vigorously, as if trying to wash away the memory of what he'd seen in the barn. The girl's terrified face appeared in his mind over time. He closed his eyes at the dinner table. Frank shoveled food into his mouth with barely a pause between bites. The only sounds in the kitchen were the clinking of forks against plates and Frank's occasional complaints about prices at the feed store. 30% increased since last summer, he grumbled. "Stabbing at a piece of chicken, highway robbery is what it is. How's a family farm supposed to survive when the bee keeps squeezing us dry?" Sarah nodded sympathetically, her eyes downcast as she pushed food around her plate. She was a thin woman with prematurely graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her once pretty features now perpetually etched with worry. Maybe things will improve next season, she offered quietly. Frank snorted. Not likely. Not with those vultures at the bank breathing down our necks about the mortgage. Ethan ate silently, his mind still in the barn with the mysterious girl. Who was she? Why was she there? And was she so afraid of his father when Frank pushed back from the table to turn on the TV and get another beer from the refrigerator? Ethan seized the opportunity. He leaned toward his mother and whispered, "Mom, do I have a sister?" The question had an immediate and dramatic effect. Sarah dropped the plate. She was clearing her hands, suddenly losing their grip. The ceramic dish shattered. On the floor, fragments scattering across the linoleum. Frank returned immediately, annoyed about the broken dish and the noise. What the hell happened? He demanded, beer in hand. Sarah's face had gone pale. "Just an accident," she said quickly, already kneeling to pick up the pieces. "My hands were wet, slipped right out." Frank's eyes moved suspicious. Brighten, Sarah and Ethan. "What were you two talking about?" "Nothing important," Sarah said, her voice unnaturally high. "Ethan, tell your father about school yesterday. Didn't you have some special presentation?" Ethan hesitated, caught off guard by his mother's obvious attempt to change the subject. Yeah, Officer Reynolds came to talk to our class about safety, the police." Frank's explained. It was just an awareness presentation. Ethan continues, watching his father carefully. "Officer Reynolds talked about how to report when someone needs help, and what to do if we see something wrong." Frank barely listens, his attention already shifting back to the baseball game, playing on the television in the living room, his expression darkening at the mere mention of police. Frank slammed his hand on the table, making both Sarah and Ethan jump. "I'm trying to watch the game. Can we have some damn quiet in this house?" For once, Sarah flinched visibly at the sudden movement, then quietly continued cleaning up the broken plate while avoiding eye contact with Ethan. The tension in the room was palpable. As they finished their meal in uncomfortable silence, the only sound coming from the baseball game blaring from the living room television. After dinner, Frank settled deeper into his recliner with more burst TV volume increasing. As the night progressed, Sarah sent Ethan to do his homework and take a shower, her ice warning him not to mention the barn again. In his bedroom, Ethan sat at his smile desk, math textbook opened before him, but the numbers blurred as he stared unseeing at the page. His mother's reaction to his question had been telling. She knew something about that girl in the barn. Her shock had been too genuine to be anything else. As he mechanically worked through his multiplication problems, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the frightened girl and the strange reaction from his mother. Something was very wrong in their home. Something beyond the financial troubles his father constantly complained about. When Sarah came to say goodnight, her smile seemed forced, her eyes darting nervously toward the hallway, as if afraid Frank might appear at any moment. "Mom," Ethan whispered, as she leaned down to kiss his forehead. "About what I asked earlier." "Not now, Ethan," she interrupted, her voice barely audible. "Please, just not now." She smoothed his hair back from his forehead, a gesture of tenderness that contrasted with the fear in her eyes. "Get some sleep, everything will be fine." But as she closed his bedroom door, Ethan knew that nothing was fine. The girl in the barn, his mother's reaction, his father's anger, it all pointed to a secret that had been hidden from him perhaps for years. Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling as through his curtains, the digital clock on his nightstand glowed 11:15 p.m., but, despite his exhaustion, sleep refused to come. His mind kept returning to the small, frightened girl in the barn, her dirty blonde hair and terrified eyes. The sound of raised voices from downstairs interrupted his thoughts. His parents were arguing. Again, as his father's deep voice rumbling through the floorboards. His mother's responses too soft to make out. Ethan strained to hear, but could only catch fragments of angry tones and sharp words. A sudden thud made him flinch, followed by what sounded like his mother crying. Then silence fell over the house. Ethan pulled his blanket tighter around himself, holding his breath, his heart racing. This wasn't the first time he'd heard sounds like these, but tonight they seemed more frightening, more whatever secret lived in their barn. Just as his eyelids grew heavy, heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, followed by his parents' bedroom door closing. He exhaled slowly, relieved that argument seemed to be over, at least for tonight. But as he drifted toward sleep, new sounds drew him back to alertness. The creak of the back door opening, followed by the faint jingle of keys. Curiosity overcame caution as Ethan slipped out of bed and moved to his bedroom window, which overlooked the backyard and provided a clear view of the barn. The full moon cast everything a silvery glow, turning the familiar landscape into something almost otherworldly in the moonlight. Ethan watched as his father stumbled toward the barn, his gait unsteady from the beers he'd consumed out the evening. Frank carried what looked like a plate of food in one hand and a bottle in the other. The barn door opened and closed, swallowing his father's silhouette. Ethan counted to 60, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would wake his mother in the next room. When he reached 60, he made Adi's musin. Slipping on his sneakers without bothering to tie the laces, he tiptoed downstairs, careful to avoid the thud. Step from the bottom that always creaked. The night air was cool against Ethan's skin as he sneaked across the yard, staying in the shadows cast by the moonlight. Crickets chirped in the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, the sounds of the Nebraska night usually comforted Ethan, but tonight they only heightened his sense of dread. He approached the barn cautiously, heart pounding in his ears. From inside he heard muffled voices, his father's slur, angry tone, and what sounded like crying. The girl's frightened eyes flashed in his memory, wide with terror, as she pressed herself against the wall. "You should be grateful," he heard his father say, his words slightly slurred. "Nobody else would take care of you like this. Nobody even looks for you anymore." A soft sob followed his father's words, and Ethan felt something twist painfully in his chest. He wanted to burst into Theburn to confront his father and help the girl, but fear kept him rooted to the spot. Frank was a large man with a violent temper. Especially when he'd been drinking. Ethan retreated from the barn door, his mind racing. Officer Reynolds' words from the school presentation echoed in his thoughts. "If you see Simonu who needs help, tell a trusted adult. If no adult will listen, call 911. You might be the only person who can save someone in danger in that moment." Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He returned to the house, moving silently past his mother's closed bedroom door. In the kitchen, the cordless phone sat in its cradle, glowing faintly in the darkness. With trembling hands, Ethan picked up the phone and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, he whispered, "There's a girl in our barn. You think she's hurt? My dad keeps her locked up." He gave their address, 4587 County Road 19, outside of Millfield. Before hanging up quickly, afraid his father might return at any moment. Heart racing, Ethan replaced the phone and rushed back to his room, taking the stairs 2 at a time despite the risk of making noise. Headed into bed and pulled the covers up to his chin, adrenaline coursing through his veins. From his window he could see the barn waiting for his father to emerge. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour as Ethan won. He'd done the right thing. What if the police didn't come? What if they didn't believe him? What if his father discovered it was Ethan who had called? But beneath the fear was ascertainty that he couldn't have done anything else. The girl in the barn needed help, and Ethan was perhaps the only person who could get it for her. After what seemed like an eternity, the barn door opened and his father emerged. Frank secured the padlock, checking it twice before heading back toward the house, his movement still unsteady. Ethan quickly closed his eyes and regulated his breathing, pretending to be asleep as his father's heavy footsteps passed his bedroom door. In the darkness of his room, Ethan waited, counting the seconds and praying that help would arrive. Before his father discovered what he had done, the floorboards creaked as Frank made his way to the master bedroom. Ethan heard the door open and close, followed by the muffled sounds of his parents' voices. His father's low and grumbling, his mother's soft and placating. Then silence fell over the farmhouse once more. Ethan lay perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the glowing numbers of his digital clock. 12:17 a.m. The minutes ticked by, agonizingly slowly as he waited, wondering if he had done the right thing. What if the police didn't believe him? What if they came and found nothing? His father would know someone had called, and it wouldn't take him long to figure out who. But the image of the frightened girl kept returning to his mind, strengthening his resolve. No matter what happened to him, he couldn't leave in that barn. At 12:38 a.m., blue and red lights suddenly illuminated Ethan's bedroom walls, flashing rhythmically through the window. He sat up, heart racing as he heard the crunch of tires in the gravel driveway. A car door opened and closed, followed by footsteps approaching the house. The sound of knocking at the front door echoed through the quiet farmhouse. Ethan held his breath, listening as his father's angry voice carried up the stairs. "Who the hell is coming around at this hour?" Frank rolled his mother's softer tones. Followed. "Frank, please calm down. Let me see who itis." More knocking, more insistent this time. Ethan crept to his bedroom door and opened it a crack, peering into the darkened hallway. He could hear his father stomping down the stairs, muttering curses. Under his breath, the front door opened and a deep voice identified itself. "Deputy Collins, Millfield County Sheriff's Department. Sorry to disturb you folks so late. What's this about?" Deputy Frank's voice had changed to Klingon, a forced politeness that Ethan recognized as dangerous. "The calm. Before the storm we received a call from this address about a person in distress." The deputy explained, his tone professional but cautious. "I need to follow up on that report." "A call from here?" Frank's voice rose in disbelief. "That's ridiculous. My wife and son are both in bed. Nobody made any call." Ethan could hear his mother's footsteps now, her voice joining the conversation. "Is everything all right, officer?" "Ma'am," someone called. 911 Frompthus residents reporting a person in need of assistance, Deputy Collins explained. They specifically mentioned Edgar Barn. There was a moment of tense silence. Ethan could imagine his father's face serene with anger, his mother's eyes widening with fear. That's absurd. Frank finally said, there's nothing in our barn but equipment and feed. Someone's playing a prank on you, Deputy. Ethan knew he should stay in bed, pretend he knew nothing about the call. But as he there listening to his father's lies, drifting up the stairs, something shifted inside him. The image of the frightened girl flashed in his mind, her dirty blonde hair, the terror in her eyes when she saw him if he stayed silent. Now what would happen to her? What would happen when the police left and his father returned to the barn with a sudden clarity that surprised even himself? Ethan realized this was his moment of truth. He could hide under his covers and pretend nothing was wrong, as he had done for years whenever his father's temper flared. Or he could stand up and tell the truth, whatever the consequences might be. His hands trembled as he pushed back his blankets, his legs felt weak as he stood, but his resolve strengthened with each step toward his bedroom door. The girl in the barn had no one else to speak for her. His mother was too afraid. It had to be him. Ethan knew it was time. He couldn't hide upstairs while his father lied to the police, with his heart hammering against his ribs. He opened his bedroom door fully and made his way to the top of the stairs. From his vantage point, he could see Deputy Collins standing in the doorway, a tall man in a car uniform, his hand resting casually near his holster. Frank stood with his back to the stairs, his posture rigid with tension. Sarah stood slightly to the side, her arms wrapped around herself as if for protection, her face pale in the harsh porch light. Deputy Collins was the first to notice Ethan. His eyes flickered up tough stairs, then back to Frank. "Is that your son?" he asked. Frank turned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Ethan. The look of betrayal and rage on his father's face made Ethan's stomach twist, but he forced himself to continue down the stairs. "Did anyone in this house make a call to emergency services tonight?" Deputy Collins asked, his gaze moving between the three family members despite his father's intimidating stare. Ethan descended the last few steps and nodded. "I did," he admitted, his voice small but steady. "I heard cries coming from inside the barn. There's a girl in there." Frank's face darkened. "He had a nightmare," he said quickly, placing a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder and squeezing hard enough to hurt. "Kids his age have active imaginations. I'm sorry he troubled you, Deputy." "I wasn't dreaming," Ethan insisted. Away from his father's grip, "I saw her." The deputy's expression remained neutral, but his posture shifted slightly, becoming more alert. "Is that right?" he asked, looking directly at Ethan. "He's confused," Frank interjected, his voice rising. "There's no one in our barn. This is private property, Deputy. Unless you have a warrant, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Deputy Collins studied Frank's face for a long moment, then glanced at Sarah, who stood frozen, her eyes darting between her husband and son. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. "I understand your concern for privacy, Mr. Matthews," the deputy said carefully, "but when a minor reports someone in distress, I have a duty to investigate." Deputy Collins suggested checking the barn just to reassure Ethan it would only take a minute. He said reasonably, "Then we can put this matter tourist." "Absolutely not." Frank refused, crossing his arms over his chest. "That's private property. You need a warrant to go poking around my buildings." The deputy observed the household dynamics with a practiced eye, noting how Sarah flinched when Frank raised his voice. When she reached up to brush hair from her face, her sleeve rode up, revealing purplish bruises circling her wrist. The deputy's gaze lingered on those marks for a moment, before returning to Frank's increasingly agitated face. "Mr. Matthews," Deputy Collins said calmly, "I understand your concern for privacy, but I should explain that since a minor reported someone in distress, I have a legal duty to investigate. This isn't optional." "My son had a nightmare," Frank insisted, his voice strained. "He sleepwalks sometimes, isn't that right, Sarah?" Sarah's eyes dropped to the floor. He has had nightmares before," she said softly, not directly confirming Frank's claim. The deputy nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Well, here's the situation as it stands. I've received a report that needs to be documented without confirming there's no one in the barn. I'll have to file this as an unresolved welfare check, which would require a follow-up visit from Child Protective Services." Frank became visibly anxious at the mention of CPS, his face wreathing with either rage or fear. "CPS? That's ridiculous. We're good parents. Tell him, Sarah." Sarah nodded mechanically, but her eyes remained fixed on the floor. "I'm sure you are," Deputy Collins said, his tone neutral, "which is why I'm offering a simple solution. A quick check of the barn would close this matter immediately, and I can be on my way. No reports, no follow-ups necessary." Frank's jaw worked as he considered his options. "It's the middle of the night," he protested weakly. "The barn is locked up. I'd have to find Neki." "I'm in no hurry," the deputy replied, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Frank's growing agitation. Ethan watched the exchange with his heart in his throat. He could see his Father calculating, trying to find a way out of the situation. For a moment he feared his father would convince the deputy to leave. And then what would happen to the girl in the barn? What would happen to him and his mother once the police were gone? Deputy Collins glanced around the entryway, his trained eye taking in details. He noticed fresh mud on Frank's boots by the door, the distinctive pattern matching the path to the barn despite Frank's earlier claims that no one goes there. "Those your work boots, Mr. Matthews?" the deputy asked, casual lining toward the muddy footwear. Frank followed his gaze. "Yeah, so hat, just noticing they're pretty fresh with mud." "Been out to the barn recently? I checked the equipment earlier," Frank said too quickly. "Like I said, there's nothing out there but farm stuff." The deputy nodded, done convinced. "Mr. Matthews, I'm going to be straight with you. Your son made a specific report about seeing a young girl in your barn. He's standing by that statement. Despite your intimidation, I can see fresh mud tracks leading to Anfram. That barn, your wife has bruises on her wrists that look like finger marks. And you're extraordinarily resistant TOA. Simple welfare check that would take all of 5 minutes." Frank's face contorted. "Withinger, are you accusing me of something, deputy?" "Not at all," Deputy Collins replied repellently. "I'm simply explaining why I can't leave without checking the barn. Now we can do this the easy way with your cooperation, or I can call for backup and get a warrant, your choice, but one way or another. I will be looking in that barn tonight." Sarah stood frozen, her eyes darting between her husband and son. Ethan could see the internal struggle playing out on her face, years of fear and obedience battling with maternal instinct to protect. Frank's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "This is harassment. I'll be filing a complaint with your superiors." "That's your right," the deputy acknowledged. "But right now, I need to see inside that barn." He reached for the radio on his holder. "I'm going to call this in. Let my department know where I am and what I'm doing." As the deputy began speaking Ginto, his radio, Frank's demeanor changed. A dangerous calm settled over him as mid a decision. "Fine," he said, cutting off the deputy's transmission. "Let's go look in the damn barn. You'll see there's nothing there but my son's imagination." Deputy Collins finished his radio call, then gestured toward the door. "After you, Mr. Matthews." Frank grabbed a flashlight from a drawer in the kitchen and stomped toward the door. The deputy followed, maintaining a careful distance. Ethan moved to join them, but Sarah grabbed his arm, holding him back. "Stay here," she whispered, her fingers digging into his arm. "I need to show them where she is." Ethan insisted. Deputy Collins overheard. "The boy should come. He can show me exactly where he believes he saw Simeone." Sarah reluctantly released her grip, and Ethan hurried to catch up with the deputy, staying close to the officerand, away from his father as they crossed the yard toward the barn. The deputy kept one hand near his holster, his eyes never leaving Frank's back. The night was quiet except for the sound of their footsteps on the gravel path and the distant call of a nightbird. When they reached Theburn, Frank fumbled with the padlock, his movements deliberately slow. "See, it's locked up tight. No one could get in or out. Open it, please." The deputy instructed his patience. Wearing thin, Frank continued to stall, pretending to struggle with the key. "Damn thing's always sticking." Deputy Collins watched Frank's delaying tactics with growing suspicion. "Mr. Matthews, I need you to open that lock now." As Frank finally inserted the key into the padlock, he suddenly changed tactics. "You know what? I've had enough of this nonsense. This is my property. I didn't consent to this search." He pulled the key out and turned to face the deputy. "Get a warrant if you want to look inside." Deputy Collins, "Mr. Matthews, based on their report from your son, the physical evidence I've observed in your behavior, I have reasonable suspicion that Apperson may be in danger. I don't need a warrant for a welfare check under the circumstances." He reached for his radio again. "I'm calling for backup. Please step away from the barn door." Frank's face twisted with rage and something else. Fear in a sudden movement that caught both Ethan and the deputy by surprise. Lunged forward, attempting to reach the barn first. Deputy Collins reacted with professional speed, grabbing Frank's arm and using his momentum to spin him around. In one fluid motion, he had Frank face down on the ground, his knee in the middle of Frank's back as he pulled handcuffs from his belt. Frank Matthews' ear interfering with a police investigation. The deputy said, his voice calm despite the physical struggle, "Stay down and put your hands behind your back." With Frank restrained on the ground, cursing and threatening legal action, Sarah made a split-second decision that would change everything. She had followed them to the barn, hanging back in the shadows, watching the confrontation unfold with growing terror. Now, seeing her husband subdued, something shifted in her expression, as if a lifetime of fear was giving way to resolve. She stepped forward into the pool of moonlight, her face pale but determined. Reaching down, she slipped her hand into her husband's pocket, ignoring his threats and protests. Her fingers closed around a small key, which she pulled out and held toward Deputy Collins. With shaking hands, "This is the key to the padlock," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There's someone in there, a Frank. Brought her home 3 years ago." Frank's face contorted with rage. "Shut her mouth, Sarah. Don't you dare." Enough, Deputy Collins cut him off, securing the handcuffs around Frank's wrists. Ma'am, are you telling me there actually is someone being held in this barn? Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to help her, but Hesed, he'd kill us both. If I told anyone, he said no one would believe me anyway. Frank continued to yell threats at Urbot. His words were cut short as Deputy Collins pulled him to his feet and guided him toward a nearby fence post, securing him there temporarily. Dispatch, this is Deputy Collins. He spoke into his radio and need immediate backup at 4587. County Road 19, possible kidnapping situation with a juvenile victim. Suspect in custody, but seen not secure. Request additional units and an ambulance on standby. The radio crackled with confirmation. Asara handed the key to the deputy, her hand trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. Ethan moved to his mother's side, slipping his small hand into hers. She squeezed it tightly as if drawing strength from her son's courage vacuumed within. Minutes to additional cruisers pulling into the farmyard with lights flashing but sirens silent in the night. The officers secured Frank, while Deputy Collins and another officer approach Eth. Barn flashlights drawn. Stay here with Officer Martinez. Deputy Collins instructed Sarah and Ethan. Nodding toward a female officer who had positioned herself beside them, Ethan watched from the doorway, his mother's arm around his shoulders as they waited in tense silence. The barn door swung open with a creak that seemed to echo across the farmyard. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness inside, sweeping methodically across the interior. Time seemed to stretch as they waited, silence broken only by Frank's muffled protests from where he was being held. Ethan felt his mother's arm tighten around his shoulders, her body trembling slightly against his. After what felt like an eternity, Deputy Collins emerged from the barn and spoke into his radio, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Dispatch, this is Collins. We need that ambulance now. We have a juvenile family approximately 5 to 7 years old, malnourished and in need of medical attention. He approached Sarah and Ethan, his expression grave. Mom, we found a young female matching the description of Emma Wilson who went missing 3 years ago from the county fair. Can you confirm how long she's been here? Sarah broke down at his words, her legs giving way as S sank to the ground. Officer Martinez quickly moved to support her as she began sobbing. Uncontrollably. I've known about Emma for nearly 2 years, she admitted between gasps for air. I found her when Frank was away at an equipment auction. She was so thin, so scared. I started sneaking food to her when I could clean clothes. Sometimes her voice cracked with emotion. Frank threatened to kill both me and Ethan if I ever told anyone. He said he'd hurt Emma worse if I tried to help her escape. Deputy Collins knelt beside her. Mrs. Matthews, did you ever try to get help? Sarah nodded, wiping tears from her face. Once I called the sheriff's office anonymously, but Frank found out somehow. He hurt me badly that night, said next time it would be Ethan who paid. Her eyes darted to her son, then away. I was too afraid after that. Ethan listened in stunned silence, the reality of what had been happening in his home for years finally becoming clear. His father hadn't just been mean or strict, he'd been a monster, hiding in plain sight. You're both safe now, Deputy Collins assured them, his voice gentle but firm. He can't hurt any of you anymore. Paramedics arrived and entered the barn, emerging minutes later with Emma on a stretcher. Ethan caught a glimpse of her pale face as they loaded her into the ambulance. Despite her obvious weakness, she turned her head, slightly looking directly at him for armament. Her eyes conveyed a mixture of fear and gratitude before the ambulance doors closed, sealing her inside. The farm had transformed into a crime scene with police vehicles, their lights still flashing, illuminating the yard. In alternating blue and red, Frank had been placed in the back of a patrol car, his angry shouts now muffled. The closed windows officers moved purposefully around the property, some taking photographs of the barn, others searching the house with Sarah's permission. Deputy Collins guided Sarah and Ethan back into their kitchen, where Eth table became command central. Notebooks and recording devices documented their accounts as more officers arrived, including detectives from the county seat. A female detective named Ramirez sat across from Sarah, her manner compassionate but professional. Mrs. Matthews, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me everything you know about how Emma Wilson came to be in your barn. Sarah spoke in a hollow voice, her hands wrapped around a mug of untukidia. It was after the county fair 3 years ago. Frank came home late, said he'd been helping a friend with car trouble. Her voice trembled. He was acting nervous. I didn't think much of it at first. The next day the news reported a missing child from theft fair. She paused, taking a shaky breath. Frank started spending time in the barn, said he was reorganizing equipment. He put a padlock on the door, kept the key with him always. I thought maybe he was drinking out there, hiding it from me. When did you discover Emma? Detective Ramirez asked gently. About a year after she disappeared. Frank went to Omaha for an equipment auction, stayed overnight. and needed some tools from the barn and found his spare key. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She was so small, so frightened. She told me her name was Emma, and that the man had found her lost at the fair, said he'd take her to her parents but brought her here instead. Ethan listened from his seat at the end of the table, where another officer was taking his statement. The horror of what had happened under Theraph made his stomach churn. Why didn't you help her escape? Then Detective Ramirez asked her, tone free of judgment. I wanted to, Sarah whispered. He promised her I would. But when Frank came home, he somehow knew I'd been in the barn. She glanced at Ethan, then continued more quietly. He hurt me badly that night, said if I ever went in there again or told anyone he'd kill Emma, then Ethan me. She wiped tears from her face. I believed him. You don't know what he's capable of when he's angry. After that, I could only sneak food to her when I was certain he wouldn't catch me. I left water bottles, extra blankets when the weather turned cold. As dawn broke over the farm, more information about Emma came to light. An officer informed them that Emma Wilson had disappeared 3 years ago, during Thekenty Fair, becoming the small town's most haunting unsolved case. Her face had been on missing posters all over the county, and her parents never stopped searching. Based on initial statements, the officer explained, it appears Frank found Emma wandering lost on your property after she became separated from her parents at the fair. Instead of returning her, he kept her locked in the barn. The officer's face hardened as he continued. From what we can tell, he subjected her to ongoing abuse while the entire community searched. We'll know more after she's been examined at the hospital and interviewed by specialists. Frank was taken away in custody, facing multiple felony charges including kidnapping, false imprisonment and assault. As the patrol carrying him disappeared down the long driveway, Sarah seemed to physically shrink, as if the weight of years of fear and pretense had finally crushed her. A victim advocate arrived, a kind-faced woman who sat with Sarah, explaining the resources available to help both her and Ethan. There's a lot to process, she said gently, but you don't have to do it alone. We have counselors, support groups, emergency housing if you need it. Ethan's statement took over an horto complete. He described finding his soccer ball in the barn, seeing Emma for the first time, watching his father visit barn at night, and finally making the decision to call 911. The officer praised his courage, but their words felt hollow against the magnitude of what had happened. As the morning progressed, news arrived that Emma had been stabilized at the hospital. She was severely malnourished and showed signs of long-term confinement, but doctors were optimistic about her physical recovery. Her parents had been notified and were on their way to the hospital for a reunion. 3 years in the making. Will Emma be okay? Ethan asked one of the officers, his voice small in the busy kitchen. The officer paused, choosing his words carefully. Physically, she'll recover with proper care. The emotional healing will take longer, but she's young and she has parents who never stopped looking for her. That's a good foundation for recovery. By mid-morning, most of the officers had departed, leaving only Deputy Collins and the victim advocate. The deputy approached Ethan, who sat on the porch steps wrapped in a blanket, watching the last police car leave. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of dew-covered grass and distant rain. Deputy Collins crouched to eye level with the boy, his face solemn but kind. Ethan, I want you to know something. What you did last night, making that call, was exactly the right thing. It took tremendous courage. Ethan looked down at his hands. I should have called sooner. As soon as I saw here yesterday, you acted when many adults wouldn't have. The deputy countered. Because of you, Emma is going home to her family. You're a hero, son. Sarah joined them on the porch. Here, red-rimmed but clearer somehow, as if a fog had lifted. She pulled Ethan into a tight embrace and whispered, you showed more courage than I ever could. I'm so sorry I failed Yalbeth. You were scared too, Mom, Ethan said, understanding beyond his years. Scared all of us. Deputy Collins stood, giving them a moment together. Mrs. Matthews, we'll need both of you to come to the station later today to formalize your statements. The district attorney will want to speak with you as well. Sarah nodded, her arms still around Ethan's shoulders. We'll better whatever it takes to make sure he never hurts anyone again. As the deputy's car disappeared down the driveway, Ethan and his mother remained on the porch watching the sun climb higher in the sky. The barn stood in the distance, crime scene tape fluttering in the morning breeze, a reminder of the darkness that had lived alongside them for years. What happens now? Ethan asked, voicing the question that hung between them. Sarah took a deep breath, seeming to stand taller than Ethan had seen in years. Now we heal together and we Makajer. Emma gets to do the same with her family. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. The nightmare hadn't ended. There would be trials and testimonies, counseling sessions, and difficult conversations. But the truth had finally come to light, and with it the possibility of a new beginning. Sarah and Ethan stood side by side, watching as crime scene tape was placed around Theburn. Morning light illuminated the farm, making everything looked different, clearer. as if a perpetual fog had lifted the red barn once a forbidden presence on their property now seemed smaller, its power diminished. Ethan felt both exhausted and lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The secrets that had poisoned their home for years had finally been exposed, and though the truth was painful, it was also freeing. I never thought I'd have the courage to stand up to him, Sarah said quietly, her gaze fixed on Theburn all these years. I told myself I was protecting you by staying silent. But you were the brave one, Ethan. He leaned against her side and replied, You were brave to Mom. You gave the deputy the key. You told the truth when it mattered most. Sarah smiled sadly, putting her arm around her son's shoulders as they walked back into the house in the kitchen. Sarah surveyed the mess of coffee cups and paperwork left by the officers. Normally she would have immediately begun cleaning, but today she simply looked at the chaos with a detached expression. This can wait. Think we both need to sleep. As they climbed the stairs together, Sarah paused at Ethan's bedroom door. I'm proud of you, she said softly, and I promise things will be In his room, Ethan pulled the blinds closed and climbed into bed. Fully clothed, he thought about Emma and hoped she'd be okay. He wondered what would happen to his father, their farm, to his mother, and himself. The future stretched before him, uncertain, but somehow less frightening than the controlled terror they'd been living in. As sleep claimed him, his last conscious thought was Emma's eyes meeting his as she was carried to the ambulance. He hoped that someday, when the trials were over, he might see her again, not as a victim, but as a regular kid with a future as bright as his own. Outside, the farm continued its timeless rhythm. The red barn stood silent, its secrets exposed. The soccer ball that had started it all still lay forgotten in the corner, waiting to be recovered. Like Ethan himself, it had been the catalyst for change, the small object that had set in motion the collapse of a carefully constructed facade, revealing the darkness beneath. As Ethan drifted into sleep, the weight of his actions, still not fully understood, the first steps toward healing, had already begun for Emma, for his mother, for himself, and for a community that would never again be the same.